He was turning 18 in an orphanage when a lawyer found him. His grandmother, the woman he thought had abandoned him, was dead, and what she left him would change the course of his entire life. If you know what it's like to have your world turned upside down in a single day, to be handed a past you never knew, and a future you can't imagine, stick with me. And because this is a place for stories just like that. My 18th birthday started the same as the 17 before it, with the smell of institutional bleach and the low hum of a fluorescent light in the hallway that never, ever turned off. For 10 years, since the day I'd been dropped here, the State Youth Authority Group Home Number 4 was the only world I knew. It wasn't a home. It was a holding pattern. A place of beige walls, scuffed linoleum, and the quiet, grinding certainty that you were just a file in a cabinet waiting for a date stamp that said, expire. That date for me was today, 18, legally an adult. Practically, I was just a boy with a worn-out duffel bag and $74 I'd saved from scrubbing floors. The plan was simple because it had to be. There was a bus station downtown. From there, a bus could take me to another city, any city, where I could try to disappear into a new kind of anonymity, the kind you choose. But the world had other plans. Mr. Henderson, the facility director, called me into his office just after the watery oatmeal they called breakfast. His office was the nicest room in the building, with a real wood desk and a window that overlooked a small, sad patch of grass. He had that look he always wore when delivering bad news, a practiced, weary sympathy that never quite reached his eyes. I figured I'd broken some rule I wasn't aware of, and they were kicking me out early. "Leo," he said, gesturing to the chair opposite his desk, "we have a visitor for you." Sitting in the other chair was a woman who did not belong in group home number 4. She wore a dark gray suit that probably cost more than my entire $74 fortune. Her hair was pulled back in a neat, severe bun, and she held a leather briefcase on her lap like it was a shield. Her face was calm, professional, and gave away nothing. "Leo, this is Ms. Albright," Henderson said, leaning back in his chair, clearly eager to be a spectator. "She's an attorney." An attorney. My blood went cold. In my world, lawyers meant trouble. They were the people who showed up when you were being formally charged, or when your parents were officially terminating their rights. They were the architects of the paperwork that defined your life. "I'm not in any trouble," I said. It came out sounding more like a question than a statement. The woman, Ms. Albright, offered a small, thin smile. It was like a crack in a stone wall. "No, Leo, you're not in any trouble. My name is Catherine Albright. I was the attorney for your grandmother, Eleanor Vance." My breath caught in my throat. Grandmother. The word felt alien. It was a name from a different life, a ghost from a story I could barely remember. I had faint, sun-drenched memories of a woman with flour on her hands and a laugh that smelled like cinnamon. I remembered a wide porch and the feeling of swinging my legs from a wooden chair that was too tall for me. And then, nothing. Just the sterile silence of a social worker's car and the slammed door of the group home. The official story, the one in my file, was abandonment. She'd left me. That was the one solid fact my entire childhood had been built upon. "My grandmother," I repeated, the words tasting like dust. "I'm very sorry to tell you this, Leo," Ms. Albright said, her voice softening just a fraction. "Eleanor passed away 2 weeks ago. It was peaceful, in her sleep." I just stared at her. 2 weeks. While I was counting down my last days here, she had been dying. The woman who had thrown me away. I felt a strange, hollow ache in my chest. It wasn't grief. It was something colder. The sting of an old wound, a final confirmation that I had been well and truly forgotten. "Okay," I said, because I didn't know what else to say. "What do you say when the ghost who haunts you is finally, officially gone?" "I'm sorry for your loss," Mr. Henderson offered, his voice dripping with the fake sincerity I'd come to despise. Ms. Albright ignored him, her eyes fixed on me. "Your grandmother's will was read yesterday, Leo. She had a very specific set of instructions. As of your 18th birthday, which is today, you are the sole beneficiary of her estate." I blinked. Her estate? Yes, her property. The house, the barn, and the surrounding 120 acres of land. It's all yours. The room went silent. The hum of the fluorescent light in the hall suddenly seemed deafening. Mr. Henderson's jaw had gone slack. He was looking at me, really looking at me, for the first time in 10 years. I wasn't a case file anymore. I was a property owner. I looked from his stunned face to Ms. Albright's calm one. I felt a laugh bubble up inside me, a hysterical, broken sound. She left me. She threw me away like garbage. And then she left me a farm. It made no sense. Nothing made any sense. "Why?" I finally managed to ask, the word barely a whisper. Ms. Albright's professional mask slipped for a second. A flicker of something real, something human, crossed her face. "Sympathy." "That," she said, her voice low and careful, "is a question I believe you'll have to find the answer to yourself. She left you more than just the property, Leo." She slid her briefcase onto the desk, the clasps clicking open with 2 sharp snaps. Inside, she produced a large manila envelope. It was thick, heavy. My name was written on the front in a shaky, elegant script I didn't recognize, but felt in my bones. "She left you the keys," Ms. Albright said, placing a small, tarnished brass key on top of the envelope. "And she left you her story." I just sat there, staring at the key. A key to a place I barely remembered, from a woman I thought had forgotten me. A place that was now, impossibly, mine. My plan had been to run, to disappear. But the ghost of Eleanor Vance had just thrown a chain around my ankle. A chain made of 120 acres of dirt and a past I was suddenly, terrifyingly, being forced to confront. The $74 in my pocket felt like a joke. The bus station seemed 1,000,000 miles away. My life, the one I thought was about to begin, had just been hijacked by a dead woman. And as I reached out and my fingers closed around that cold, solid key, I had a feeling that the real story wasn't about what she had left me, but why she had left me in the first place. The silence that followed Ms. Albright's departure was heavier than any I'd ever known in that office. Mr. Henderson was looking at me with a bizarre mix of awe and suspicion, as if I'd just revealed myself to be a foreign prince. The power dynamic in the room had irrevocably shifted. An hour ago, I was a ward of the state he was responsible for. Now, I was a landowner, a person of substance, someone with a lawyer. The absurdity of it was a bitter pill. I clutched the manila envelope to my chest. It felt warm, or maybe that was just my own nervous sweat. Inside was the deed, a cashier's check for a few $1,000s labeled transitional funds, and a folded map of a county I'd never heard of. And the key. The key felt heavier than all of it. "Well, Leo," Henderson finally said, clearing his throat, This is unexpected, you think? I said, my voice flat. I was still numb, floating somewhere outside my own body, watching this ridiculous scene unfold. 10 years of being treated like a piece of faulty equipment, and now he was looking at me like I was a winning lottery ticket. He started talking about options, about financial advisors, about the responsibilities of property ownership. His words were a meaningless drone. All I could think about were those faint, fractured memories. The smell of rain on dry dirt, the rough feel of a splintery porch railing under my small hands, the sound of her voice, a low hum that vibrated in my chest when she held me. How could the woman from those memories be the same one who signed a piece of paper and walked away? The narrative I had carefully constructed to survive my childhood was simple. She didn't want me. It was a clean wound, a single, sharp cut. It hurt, but it was understandable. People leave, people disappoint. It was the first and most important lesson the system taught you. But this act of leaving me everything, it didn't fit. It tore the scar wide open. It suggested a story far more complicated and painful. It suggested that I had been wrong about everything. That night, my last night in the group home, I didn't sleep. I lay on the thin, lumpy mattress, staring at the water-stained ceiling, and let the memories come. I remembered her face more clearly now. Wrinkles around her eyes from smiling. A streak of gray in her dark hair. Her hands, strong and capable, kneading dough on a floured countertop. I was 7. We were making bread. She let me punch the dough down, and I laughed so hard I fell off my stool. She picked me up, her apron smelling of yeast and something floral, like lavender. Then another memory, darker. A man's voice, angry and loud, coming from behind a closed door. Her voice, quiet but firm, answering him. I was told to stay in my room. I sat on the floor, pressing my ear to the wood, trying to understand the jagged, sharp-edged words. I couldn't make them out, but I could feel the fear coiling in the air. The next day, she told me we were going on a trip. She packed a small bag for me with my favorite dinosaur pajamas and a worn-out stuffed bear. Her face was tight, her eyes shadowed. She drove for hours in her old pickup truck, the one with a cracked dashboard. She didn't talk much. We ended up in a clean, bright office with a woman who smiled too much. My grandmother knelt down in front of me. Her hands were trembling. "Leo, honey, you're going to stay here for a little while," she'd said, her voice thick. "It's a safe place. I have to go take care of some grown-up business. I love you. Don't you ever forget that." I remember clinging to her leg, crying, not understanding. She pried my fingers away, kissed my forehead, and walked out the door without looking back. That was the last time I ever saw her. A little while had turned into 10 years. Grown-up business had become permanent abandonment. "I love you" had become the most painful lie of my life. And now, holding this key in my hand, I had to wonder, was it a lie? Or was it a promise she had just kept in the most confounding way imaginable? The next morning, I packed my single duffel bag. A few changes of clothes, a toothbrush, a dog-eared paperback. The sum total of my life. I walked through the common room, past the other boys who were already forgetting my existence, their faces buried in bowls of cereal. No one said goodbye. In this place, departures were silent, like ghosts slipping through a wall. Mr. Henderson walked me to the front door. He shook my hand, a gesture so out of place it felt like a scene from a movie. "Good luck, Leo," he said. "If you need anything." He let the offer hang in the air. I just nodded and walked away, not looking back. I didn't want to see the door to group home number 4 close behind me. I just wanted to feel the certainty of it being shut forever. The bus station was a chaotic symphony of noise and desperation. People rushing, people waiting, people with nowhere to go. For the first time, I felt a kinship with them. I was one of them now, untethered. I found the ticket window and pushed the folded map Ms. Albright had given me under the glass. "A one-way ticket to a town called Oakhaven," I said. The man behind the counter, bored and tired, punched a few keys. "That'll be $42. Bus leaves in an hour. Gate 7. I handed over more than half of my life savings, and he handed me a thin strip of paper. My ticket to a new life, or maybe just to an old one. I had an hour to kill. I sat on a hard plastic bench, the duffel bag at my feet, the manila envelope clutched in my hands. I was officially free. No rules, no curfews, no Mr. Henderson. I could do anything, go anywhere. But I was on a bus to Oakhaven. I was following a ghost. Was this my choice, or was it hers? The line between the two felt blurry, indistinct. I was a puppet whose strings were being pulled from beyond the grave. The bus ride was 6 hours long. 6 hours of watching the world transform through a grimy window. The dense gray towers of the city gave way to the sprawling, identical houses of the suburbs. The suburbs bled into strip malls and highways, and then, slowly, into something else entirely. The concrete and steel receded, replaced by wide-open fields, patches of dense forest, and long, empty stretches of road. The light changed, too. The harsh, reflected glare of the city softened into a golden, late-afternoon glow that spilled across the rolling hills. It was a landscape I hadn't seen since I was a child. It felt like traveling back in time. I spent most of the ride staring out that window, my own reflection a pale, ghostly, superimposed image on the passing scenery. A boy with tired eyes and a tense jaw. A boy who looked like he was bracing for an impact. I kept replaying that last day with her in my head. Her trembling hands. Her promise that it was a safe place. The lie, or what I had always believed to be a lie, that she loved me. What kind of love leaves a 7-year-old boy in the hands of strangers and never comes back? What kind of grown-up business takes a decade to resolve? The questions circled in my mind like vultures. For every question, my anger provided a simple, brutal answer. She didn't want the burden. She found a way out. The farm, the inheritance, it was just guilt, a final, grand gesture to clear her conscience. It was a neat, tidy explanation. It protected the wound. But the key in my pocket felt heavy with a different possibility, a more complicated truth. The bus rattled and hissed, pulling me from my thoughts. We were slowing down, turning off the main highway onto a smaller 2-lane road. A faded green sign announced, Oakhaven, population 1,243. The town was little more than a crossroads, a single main street lined with brick buildings from another century. A post office, a grocery store with a peeling sign, a gas station, a diner with a flickering neon open sign. It was quiet, the kind of quiet that feels heavy, full of unspoken histories. The bus wheezed to a stop in front of the diner. "Oakhaven!" the driver yelled, not bothering to turn around. I was the only one who got off. I stood on the sidewalk, my duffel bag slung over my shoulder, as the bus pulled away with a cloud of diesel smoke, leaving me in a profound silence. The air smelled different here. Clean, earthy, with the sweet scent of cut grass and damp soil. It was the smell from my memories. A wave of dizziness washed over me. I was a stranger here, but my body remembered it. I felt like a ghost haunting the edges of my own past. I looked at the map Ms. Albright had given me. It was a hand-drawn addition to a printed county map. A red circle marked the town, and a thin, spidery line snaked out from it, ending at a small square marked Vance Property. It looked to be a few miles out of town. There were no taxis, no Ubers, just a setting sun painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. So I started walking. The walk was long. The sidewalk ended a few blocks from the town center, and I was left on the gravel shoulder of the road. Cars were few and far between, their headlights cutting through the growing twilight. The sounds of the country began to emerge from the silence. The chirping of crickets, the low croak of a bullfrog in a distant ditch, the rustle of wind through the tall stalks of corn in the fields beside the road. It was both peaceful and unnerving. I felt exposed, a solitary figure in a vast, indifferent landscape. After what felt like an eternity, I saw it. A rusted mailbox, half hidden by overgrown weeds, the name Vance, barely visible in faded, peeling paint. Behind it, a long gravel driveway disappeared into a tunnel of ancient, overhanging oak trees. This was it. My heart hammered against my ribs. I took a deep breath and turned off the road, my feet crunching on the loose gravel. The trees blocked out the last of the dying light, and the temperature dropped. It was like entering another world. The driveway was longer than I expected, winding through the trees for at least a quarter of a mile. And then the trees opened up, and I saw it. The house. It stood on a gentle rise, silhouetted against the twilight sky. It was a simple two-story farmhouse, with a wide porch wrapping around the front. The white paint was peeling, and one of the shutters hung at a drunken angle, but it stood straight and proud. To the left was a large, imposing barn, its red paint faded to a dull, dusty rose. The fields around the house were overgrown with weeds and wildflowers, swaying gently in the evening breeze. It wasn't abandoned, it was just sleeping. I walked up the 3 wooden steps to the porch, my footsteps echoing in the quiet air. They were the first human sounds this place had heard in weeks. I stood before the front door, a heavy, dark wood door with a small leaded glass window at the top. I pulled the key from my pocket. My hand was shaking so badly it took me a moment to fit the key into the lock. It turned with a stiff, grinding click that seemed impossibly loud. I pushed the door open. It swung inward with a low, mournful groan. A wave of air washed over me from inside. It was the smell of a place that had been sealed for a long time. The smell of dust, of old wood, of dried herbs, and something else, something faint and familiar. The scent I associated with her, lavender. My throat tightened. I stepped across the threshold, leaving the world I knew behind, and entering the house my grandmother had built. The house she had died in, the house that was now mine. I was home, and I had never felt more lost in my entire life. I stood in the entryway for a long time, letting my eyes adjust to the deep gloom inside. The last vestiges of sunlight filtered through the dusty windows, casting long, distorted shadows that made the furniture look like sleeping beasts. Everything was covered in white dust cloths, turning the room into a landscape of pale, silent ghosts. A grandfather clock stood silent against one wall, its pendulum still. A staircase with a beautifully carved newel post rose into the darkness of the second floor. It was a house frozen in time, waiting for someone to press play. I dropped my duffel bag by the door and started to explore. my footsteps muffled by the thick layer of dust on the hardwood floors. I moved slowly, cautiously, as if afraid of waking something up. I pulled the sheet off a sofa in the living room. It was old, floral, but well made. On a side table next to it was a stack of books and a pair of reading glasses, left exactly where she had put them down for the last time. It was an archaeology of a life. Every object was a clue. The kitchen was at the back of the house. It was large and airy, with a huge farmhouse sink and a worn wooden table in the center. A calendar on the wall was still turned to a month that was 2 weeks old. A single coffee mug sat in the drying rack by the sink. The intimacy of these small details was suffocating. This wasn't just a property. It was the physical evidence of a life lived without me. The anger I'd been nursing for a decade began to feel thin, brittle. It was hard to hate a ghost when you were standing in the quiet center of her life. I made my way up the creaking stairs. There were 3 doors on the second-floor landing. The first opened into a bathroom, clean but dated, with a clawfoot tub. The second was a guest room, tidy and impersonal. The third door was slightly ajar. I pushed it open. It was her bedroom. The air in here was different, more concentrated with that lavender scent. A large 4-poster bed dominated the room, neatly made. A handmade quilt was folded at its foot. There was a rocking chair by the window, a dresser, and a small writing desk. It was simple, sparse, but comfortable. It felt like her. On the nightstand beside the bed, next to a small lamp, sat a small carved wooden box. It was dark wood, intricately carved with vines and leaves. It seemed important, placed there deliberately. I picked it up. It was heavier than it looked, and it was locked. I tried to jiggle the little brass lock, but it was solid. My heart started beating faster. This was it. This felt like the reason I was here. I remembered the key Ms. Albright had given me. It was for the front door. But on the same ring was a second, much smaller, more ornate key. I'd barely noticed it before. My fingers trembled as I pulled the keychain from my pocket. I selected the small key and inserted it into the lock on the box. It was a perfect fit. I turned it, and with a soft click, the lock sprang open. I lifted the lid. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, were 2 things. The first was a thick stack of letters, at least a dozen of them, tied together with a faded blue ribbon. The handwriting on the top envelope was the same elegant, shaky script from the manila envelope. My name, Leo. The second thing was a single newspaper clipping, yellowed and folded into a neat square. My hands were unsteady as I picked up the clipping first. It seemed less intimidating than the letters. I unfolded it carefully. It was from a small local paper, the Oak Haven Chronicle. The date was printed at the top. It was from almost 12 years ago, not long after she had left me. It was a small article, buried on page 3. The headline read, "Local Man Implicated in Racketeering Probe." There was a grainy, black and white photo of a man in handcuffs being led from a courthouse. He had a smug, defiant look on his face. He looked vaguely familiar. I read the first sentence of the article. James Vance, 34, of Oak Haven, was arrested yesterday in connection with an ongoing federal investigation into a loan sharking and racketeering operation with ties to organized crime in the city. Vance. James Vance. My father. I had no memory of him. My file said, "Father unknown." Another lie. She had known. She had known all along. My mind reeled. The angry voices behind the closed door. the fear in her eyes the day she took me away. It was all starting to connect in a way that made me feel sick. He was a criminal. My father was a criminal. I dropped the clipping back into the box as if it had burned my fingers. My carefully constructed world, already fractured, was now shattering into a million pieces. With a sense of dread that was cold and heavy in my gut, I picked up the stack of letters. I untied the blue ribbon. The first letter was thick. I pulled the pages from the envelope and unfolded them. The date at the top was from the week after she had left me. "My dearest Leo," it began. "If you are reading this, it means I am gone, and you have come home. I hope you are 18 and strong, and that the world has been at least a little kind to you, though I fear it has not. There are so many things I need to explain, and I pray you will find it in your heart to forgive me when you understand. I know you believe I abandoned you. I will carry the pain of you believing that to my grave. But you must know, my dear boy, it was not an abandonment. It was a rescue. Your father, James, he was not a good man. I thought I could save him from himself, but the darkness in him ran too deep. He got involved with terrible people, criminals from the city. They lent him money, and he used this farm, our home, as collateral without telling me. When he couldn't pay them back, they came to collect. They threatened him. They threatened me. And then, my sweet boy, they threatened you. I heard them. I heard them tell your father that a little boy would be very persuasive collateral. That was the day my love for your father died, and my fear for you became the only thing in the world that mattered. I couldn't protect you here. The house was being watched. I knew they would take you to get to the land. So I did the only thing I could. I took you away. I took you to the state, to a place where they couldn't find you, where you would be a number in a file, a ghost, anonymous, safe. It was the hardest thing I have ever done, walking out that door. It felt like ripping my own heart out of my chest. The day I left you was the day I declared war. I went to the police. I told them everything I knew about your father and his associates. The newspaper clipping you found tells you part of that story. But that was only the beginning. My fight was to save this farm for you, this home. I knew that if I kept you with me, they would have used you against me. But if I gave you up, I could fight them with everything I had. And one day, if I won, I could give you back the home they tried to steal from us. I love you, Leo. I have loved you every single day of the last 10 years. Every sunrise, I have thought of you. Every night, I have prayed for your safety. This farm is not a payment for my guilt. It is the proof of my love. It is your birthright, defended and held for you. Your loving grandmother, Eleanor. I read the letter 3 times, my vision blurring with tears I didn't know I had. The words swam on the page. Abandonment, rescue. My entire life, my entire identity was built on a single false premise. She hadn't thrown me away. She had hidden me. She hadn't run from the fight. She had run toward it. The cold, hollow ache in my chest blossomed into a pain so vast and overwhelming it buckled my knees. I sank to the floor, the letter clutched in my hand, and for the first time since I was 7 years old, I cried. I cried for the little boy who thought his grandmother didn't love him. I cried for the woman who had to make an impossible choice. I cried for the 10 lost years, for the anger I had carried like a shield, for the love I had been too blind to see. The dust motes danced in the fading light, silent witnesses to my grief. The house was no longer a strange, intimidating place. It was a sanctuary, a fortress, and I was finally, truly, home. The grief came in waves, a relentless tide pulling me under. I stayed on the floor of her bedroom for hours, The unsent letters spread around me like fallen leaves. Each one told a piece of the story. Letters from the first few years were filled with heartbreak and a fierce, desperate hope. She wrote about the lonely nights, the deafening silence of the house, how she would sometimes set a place for me at the dinner table out of habit. She wrote about her progress in the legal battle to sever my father's name from the deed, a fight that took years and cost her nearly everything she had. As I read, a decade of my life was rewritten. The sterile walls of the group home were no longer a prison. They were the walls of a bunker she had placed me in. The anonymity I hated was the very shield that had kept me safe. Every cold dinner, every lonely night, every time I'd cursed her name, she had been here, fighting a silent, solitary war for me. The sun went down completely, plunging the house into a deep, profound darkness. I didn't bother looking for a light switch. I just sat there in the dark, letting the weight of it all settle over me. The anger that had been my constant companion for so long was gone, replaced by a deep, aching sorrow and a sliver of something else. Gratitude. How do you thank someone who is gone? How do you repay a debt that immense? I eventually stumbled downstairs, my legs stiff, my body hollowed out. I was starving, but the thought of food was repulsive. I found the sink in the kitchen and drank water straight from the tap. It was cold and clean, with a mineral taste of the earth. It tasted like the place it came from. I wandered into the living room and collapsed onto the floral sofa, not bothering to put the dust cloth back on. I fell into a sleep so deep it was like a black, dreamless void. I woke to the first pale light of dawn filtering through the windows. For a moment, I didn't know where I was. The unfamiliar shapes of the furniture, the smell of dust and lavender. Then it all came crashing back. I was in my grandmother's house. My house. I sat up, my body aching. The exhaustion was bone deep, but the hysterical edge of my grief had softened into a quiet, heavy sadness. I knew I had a choice to make. The cashier's check from Ms. Albright was still in the envelope. It was enough to live on for a few months. I could sell this place. 120 acres, even with a run-down house, had to be worth a lot of money. A developer would snap it up in a heartbeat. I could take the money and run. Go to that city I'd planned on, get an apartment, a job, and never look back. I could leave the ghosts and the painful memories behind and start fresh, truly fresh this time. It was the easy path, the sensible path. For a moment, the temptation was overwhelming. Freedom. No responsibilities, no haunted history. Just cash and a clean slate. I got up and walked back to the kitchen. The morning light was stronger now, illuminating the room. On the kitchen table, where the single mug sat in the drying rack, was a pile of mail that had been collected from the mailbox and placed there, probably by a neighbor. It was mostly junk, but at the bottom of the pile were several thick, glossy envelopes. The return address was for something called the Pine Ridge Development Group. I picked one up. It was addressed to the estate of Eleanor Vance. I tore it open. Inside was a professionally printed brochure with aerial photographs of the farm and the surrounding area. There were architectural renderings of a golf course, luxury homes, a clubhouse. "The Future of Oak Haven," the headline read. Tucked inside the brochure was a letter. It was a formal offer to purchase the entire 120-acre property. The number they offered made my head spin. It was more money than I could possibly imagine. Enough to live comfortably for the rest of my life. Enough to erase the group home, the poverty, the feeling of being nothing. It was a ticket to a different world. My hand trembled as I held the paper. This was the easy way out, gift-wrapped and handed to me. All I had to do was sign, sell the land, sell the memories, sell her sacrifice. I could walk away from it all, a rich man. I thought about it. I really did. I thought about a new car, a nice apartment, never having to worry about money again. It was a powerful dream. But then I looked around the kitchen. I saw the worn spot on the floor in front of the sink where she must have stood for countless hours. I saw the nicks and scratches on the wooden table, each one a mark of a life lived. I thought of her letters, of her lonely, decade-long fight. She didn't fight for a piece of real estate. She fought for a home. She fought for me. Selling it would be the real abandonment. It would be like saying her sacrifice meant nothing, that it was all just a transaction. It would be the ultimate betrayal. My choice was suddenly, painfully clear. Now listen, if you've made it this far into my story, I want to ask you something. Have you ever been faced with a choice like that? A choice between the easy thing and the right thing, between running away from your past and turning around to face it. It's a moment that defines you. It's the moment you decide who you are going to be. For me, standing in that quiet kitchen, holding a multi-million-dollar offer in one hand and the weight of my grandmother's love in the other, that was the moment. The money was tempting, I won't lie. It promised a life without struggle. But her sacrifice promised something more. It promised a life with meaning. Let me know, and I want to hear your stories. Because I think these are the moments that connect all of us. Now, let's get back to what I decided to do. I carefully folded the letter from Pine Ridge Development and put it back in its glossy envelope. Then I did something that felt both childish and deeply satisfying. I walked over to the old wood-burning stove in the corner of the living room, opened its little iron door, and tossed the envelope inside. It wasn't a real solution, but it was a declaration, a promise to myself and to her. I wasn't selling, I was staying. The decision didn't magically solve all my problems. In fact, it created 1,000 new ones. The house needed a new roof. The fields were a jungle. The barn probably had more holes than solid walls. The few $1,000s from Ms. Albright wouldn't last long if I had to start paying property taxes and utility bills. I was an 18-year-old kid who knew how to mop a floor and stay out of trouble. I didn't know the first thing about running a farm, fixing a house, or managing an estate. I was overwhelmed, terrified, and completely out of my depth. But for the first time in my life, I also felt a sense of purpose. This place wasn't a burden. It was a responsibility. It was my inheritance, and I was going to honor it. My new purpose gave me a new kind of energy. The grief was still there, a heavy cloak I knew I would wear for a long time. But now it was interwoven with determination. I needed to understand everything. If I was going to fight for this place, I needed to know what I was fighting against and what I was fighting with. I went back upstairs to her bedroom, but this time I didn't go for the letters filled with love and pain. I went to the writing desk in the corner. It was a simple, sturdy oak desk, covered in a fine layer of dust. The top was neat, a blotter, a pen holder, a small stack of bills paid and filed. It was the desk of an organized person. I started opening the drawers. The top ones held stationery, stamps, old checkbook registers, the usual things. But the bottom drawer on the right side was locked. It didn't have a keyhole like the box had. I pulled on it, but it was solid. I ran my fingers along the underside, the back, the sides. Nothing. It seemed impossible. Then I remembered something from an old movie. I pulled the drawer above it all the way out and set it on the floor. I reached my hand into the empty space, feeling along the top of the locked bottom drawer. My fingers brushed against a small wooden latch on the inside of the desk frame. I pushed it. It moved with a quiet click. I reached down and pulled the handle of the bottom drawer. It slid open smoothly. It was a false bottom, or rather, a hidden lock. My grandmother, I was beginning to realize, was a woman full of secrets. The contents of this drawer were different. There were no emotional letters. This was her war room. There was a thick, black ledger, stacks of documents held together with binder clips, and another bundle of letters. These ones not tied with a ribbon, but clipped to copies of her own typed responses. I opened the ledger first. The first few pages detailed the farm's meager earnings from years ago, the sale of some hay, a few dozen eggs a week. Then the entries changed. They became a meticulous accounting of her expenses in the fight. Lawyers' fees, court filing fees, private investigator fees. My heart sank as I saw the numbers. She had bled money for years. Then I saw the other side of the ledger, income. She had sold off a 10-acre parcel in the back, then another 5-acre parcel a few years later. She had been selling off pieces of the farm, her home, to pay for the fight to save the rest of it for me. It was a slow, calculated amputation to save the body. I closed the ledger, my throat tight. The sheer tenacity, the quiet, grinding persistence it must have taken, was staggering. I turned to the stacks of letters. These weren't from her. They were from Pine Ridge Development. The first ones were dated nearly 8 years ago. They started off friendly, with polite inquiries about her interest in selling. Her typed responses were equally polite, but firm. The property was not for sale. Then the tone of their letters began to change. They became more frequent, more insistent. The offers grew larger. They started mentioning zoning changes, community benefits, the inevitability of progress. Her responses remained unchanged. The property is not for sale. About 3 years ago, the letters turned ugly. They became legal threats. They mentioned obscure easements, property line disputes, unpaid tax assessments they had somehow discovered. They were trying to bully her, to bleed her dry, to make it impossible for her to stay. Her responses became legalistic, sharp, citing statutes and precedents. She must have been spending hours in a law library. She was fighting sharks, and she was doing it alone. Then I found the last letter in the bundle. It was from her, a carbon copy of a letter she had sent to Pine Ridge just a month before she died. And attached to it was a document from a private investigator she had hired. "My dearest sirs," she had written, "for 8 years you have harassed me, hoping I would break. You assumed I was just a lonely old woman who would eventually give up. You were wrong. I know who you are. I know that your primary investor is a holding company with direct financial ties to the same criminal organization my ex-husband was a part of. I know this isn't about development. This is about an old debt you feel you are owed. You are not developers. You are vultures, attempting to finish what your friends started a decade ago. The attached report from my investigator, along with a full history of your harassment, has been filed with my attorney. It has also been sent to the State Attorney General's office and the investigative desk of the city newspaper. This farm is not, and will never be, for sale. Any further contact from you will be considered harassment and will be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. You are not dealing with James Vance anymore. You are dealing with me, Eleanor Vance." I sat back in the chair, stunned. She hadn't just fought them, she had won. She had exposed them, cornered them, and cut them off. She had checkmated them just before she died. She hadn't left me a problem. She had left me a victory. But as I sat there, a cold dread trickled down my spine. She had won her fight, but the vultures were still circling. They had sent me that offer, the one I'd burned. They didn't know that I knew. They thought they were dealing with a grieving, ignorant 18-year-old kid. They thought they could win the next round easily. The fight wasn't over. It had just been passed to me. The silence of the house felt different now. It was no longer a peaceful, sleeping quiet. It was the tense, listening quiet of a battlefield after the first volley. My grandmother had won a major battle, but the war for the farm was not over. They would be back. They just didn't know I had found her ammunition. The next morning, a car came up the driveway. It wasn't a dusty pickup truck like you'd expect in the country. It was a sleek, black sedan that looked completely out of place against the backdrop of overgrown fields. It crunched to a stop in front of the house, and a man in a crisp, dark suit got out. He was tall, with slicked-back hair and a smile that was all teeth. He looked like a shark that had learned how to walk and talk. He walked up to the porch, stopping at the bottom step, and looked me over. I had been outside, trying to wrestle a tangled, rusty chain off an old gatepost. I was covered in dirt and rust, wearing a t-shirt with a hole in it, and jeans that were stiff with grime. I probably looked exactly like the easy mark he was expecting. "Leo Vance?" he asked, his voice smooth as silk. "I'm Daniel Crow, from the Pine Ridge Development Group. I sent you a letter. We are so very sorry for your loss. Your grandmother was a pillar of this community." The lie was so blatant, so effortless, it took my breath away. I just stared at him, my hands gripping the rusty chain. "I got your letter," I said. "It's a very generous offer," he said, his smile widening. He took a step up onto the porch, invading my space. "We feel this project would be a wonderful way to honor her memory, a legacy of progress for Oakhaven. And for you, well, it's a chance to start fresh. No burdens, no old house to worry about. Just a future you can build anywhere you want." He was selling me the same dream I had almost sold myself, the easy way out. But hearing it from his lips, it sounded cheap and hollow. It sounded like a trap. "The property isn't for sale," I said, my voice quiet but steady. Crow's smile didn't falter, but a flicker of annoyance crossed his eyes. "Leo, let's be realistic. You're a young man. What are you going to do with all this? It's a lot of work, a lot of responsibility. The taxes alone, it's a burden. Our offer is more than fair. In fact," he reached into his suit jacket and pulled out another glossy folder. "I'm authorized to increase our offer by 20%. He held it out to me. 20%. Another mountain of money piled on top of the first. It was a staggering amount. He thought he could buy me. He thought I was my father's son. I looked from the folder in his hand to his smug, confident face, and I felt the spirit of my grandmother rise up in me, a cold, hard resolve. I let go of the chain and wiped my dirty hands on my jeans. "Mr. Crow," I said, my voice as calm and flat as I could make it. "I believe my grandmother's last correspondence with your group made her position, and now my position, perfectly clear. You are not developers. You are debt collectors, and this is not a negotiation. The farm is not, and will never be, for sale." I quoted her own words back at him. The effect was instantaneous. His smile vanished. The friendly mask fell away, revealing the cold, hard predator beneath. He looked genuinely shocked, his eyes narrowing as he re-evaluated me. I was no longer an ignorant kid. I was a threat. "You're making a mistake, boy," he hissed, his voice losing its silky smoothness. This is a big, complicated world. It would be a shame for a young man like you to get caught up in old family business you don't understand." It was a threat, veiled but unmistakable. He pocketed the folder, his movements sharp and angry. He gave me one last, venomous look, turned on his heel, and strode back to his car. He got in and sped back down the driveway, leaving a cloud of dust and the lingering feeling of menace in the air. My legs felt weak. My heart was pounding, but I was also filled with a surge of adrenaline, of triumph. I had faced the dragon, and I hadn't flinched. As soon as the sound of his car faded, I ran inside and went straight for the phone. It was an old rotary phone on a table in the hall, and I prayed it still worked. I found Ms. Albright's card in the manila envelope and painstakingly dialed her number. She answered on the second ring. "Catherine Albright?" "Ms. Albright, it's Leo Vance." "Leo, I was wondering when I'd hear from you. Is everything all right?" "Sort of," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "A man from Pine Ridge Development just paid me a visit." I told her everything. About the letters in the box, the hidden drawer, the ledger, the private investigator's report. I told her about Daniel Crow's visit and his veiled threat. She was silent for a long moment after I finished. "Leo," she finally said, and her voice was different. The professional reserve was gone, replaced by a tone of deep respect. "Your grandmother was an even more remarkable woman than I knew. She built you a fortress and left you a sword and shield." "What do I do now?" I asked. "You do nothing," she said firmly. "You let me do my job. Fax me copies of every single one of those documents. The letters, the ledger, the investigator's report. Everything. I'm no longer just the executor of this estate, Leo. As of this moment, I am your legal counsel, and I'm going to do it pro bono. We are going to bury these people." Hearing those words, feeling her fierce advocacy on my side, was like a dam breaking inside me. For the first time, I wasn't alone in this fight. The next day, I drove my grandmother's ancient pickup truck into town. It had started with a roar after I found the keys in a kitchen drawer, and spent 2 hours at the library, faxing documents to Ms. Albright's office in the city. When I was done, I felt lighter. I had passed the torch, or at least I was now sharing the load. On the way back, I felt a new sense of purpose. The legal battle was in capable hands. My battle was here, with the land. I stopped at the hardware store in Oakhaven and bought work gloves, a new blade for a rusty handsaw I'd found in the barn, and a box of nails. When I got back to the farm, I didn't hesitate. I walked out to the sagging front porch, found the weakest board, and got to work. Prying up the rotten wood, measuring a replacement from a stack of old lumber in the barn, sawing it to fit. It was hard, clumsy work. I hit my thumb with the hammer twice, but when I finally nailed the new board into place and stood on it, feeling its solid strength under my feet, a feeling of profound satisfaction washed over me. I was fixing something that was broken. I was rebuilding. As I was cleaning up, an old man on a bright green tractor chugged to a stop on the road at the end of my driveway. He watched me for a minute, then shut off the engine and ambled over. He was wiry and weathered with kind eyes. "You must be Eleanor's boy," he said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. I nodded. "Leo." "Henry," he said, offering a calloused hand. "Live just down the road. Knew your grandmother my whole life." We shook. His grip was like iron. "She was a fighter, your grandma," he said, looking at the house. "A real fighter. Stubborn as this damn dirt. Glad to see someone's here to keep it going. He looked at the pile of rotten wood I'd pulled up. Porch needs work, huh? Among other things, I said with a dry laugh. Well, he said, turning to leave, if you need to borrow a tool or need a hand with something too heavy to lift, you know where I am. He didn't wait for a response. He just nodded, walked back to his tractor, and started it up with a puff of smoke. I watched him go, a lump forming in my throat. A lawyer in the city, a neighbor down the road. My grandmother had left me more than just a farm and a fight. She had left me allies. I was putting down roots, whether I knew it or not. Weeks turned into a month, then 2. Life on the farm fell into a rhythm dictated by the sun and the seemingly endless list of repairs. I learned that my grandmother's pickup truck was a stubborn beast that only started on the 3rd try, never the 1st or 2nd. I learned that the old well pump behind the house could be coaxed into life with a firm kick to its side. I learned the language of the house, the groan of the pipes when the water was running, the sigh of the foundation settling at dusk, the rattle of the window panes when a storm rolled in from the west. Ms. Albright called once a week. Armed with my grandmother's meticulous records, she had sent a blistering legal notice to Pine Ridge Development. She informed them that any further attempt to contact me would result in a lawsuit for harassment and a request for a criminal investigation into their business practices, leveraging the private investigator's report. According to her, their lawyers had responded with a 1-sentence letter. We retract our offer. They had vanished. The threat that had loomed so large had dissipated like morning fog. The war was officially over. I had won. Or rather, my grandmother and I had won. The victory didn't feel like a sudden explosion of triumph. It was a quiet, deep-seated sense of peace. The knowledge that I could wake up in the morning and not have to look for a black sedan at the end of my driveway was a freedom more profound than any amount of money could have bought. With a legal battle behind me, the real work began. The work of reclamation. I started with the yard, a wild jungle of weeds and thorns. I spent days with a rusty scythe I found in the barn, cutting back years of neglect. Beneath the overgrowth, I discovered the faint outlines of a garden, with stone-lined beds and a forgotten rose bush that still had a few defiant, pale pink blooms. I found a stone path leading from the back porch to the barn, completely swallowed by grass. Uncovering it felt like archaeology, like revealing a secret of the land. The work was grueling. My hands, soft from a decade of indoor life, became calloused and raw. My back ached constantly. Some days I'd collapse into bed, too tired to even eat, and wonder what in the world I was doing. It would have been so much easier to sell. But then I would wake up to the sun streaming through the old wavy glass of my bedroom window, and I would feel her presence, not as a ghost, but as a quiet strength, a silent encouragement. I was honoring her fight with every weed I pulled, every nail I hammered. One afternoon, while clearing out a corner of the barn, I found a large wooden chest tucked under a dusty canvas tarp. It wasn't locked. I lifted the heavy lid, and a cloud of dust and the smell of cedar filled the air. Inside, it was filled with her things. Not legal documents or battle plans, but personal treasures. There were photo albums. I sat on the dusty floor of the barn and opened the first one. There she was, a young woman with dark hair and a bright smile, standing next to a young man who must have been my grandfather. There were pictures of the farm when it was young, the house freshly painted, the fields neat and tidy. Then there were pictures of a baby, my father. I watched him grow up in those pages, from a smiling boy to a sullen teenager. And then there were pictures of me, a baby in her arms on the front porch, a toddler taking his first steps in the grass, a little boy with a gap-toothed grin holding up a string of fish. She had documented my early life with a loving, meticulous eye. There were so many moments I didn't remember, but here was the proof. I was loved. I was wanted. The last photo in the album was of the two of us, sitting on the porch swing. I was about 6. I was leaning against her, my head on her shoulder, fast asleep. She was looking down at me, and the expression on her face was one of such fierce, profound love that it made my chest ache. That was the woman who had fought for me, not a distant, cold figure who had signed me away, but this woman, with this look in her eyes. I closed the album, the past settling into place, not as a story of pain and abandonment, but as a complex, heartbreaking story of love and sacrifice. My own story was no longer about being the boy who was left behind. It was about being the boy who was saved, the boy who was given a second chance. I started to see the farm not as a collection of problems to be solved, but as a living thing. It was her legacy, her final letter to me, written in wood and stone and dirt. The porch wasn't just a porch. It was where she had held me as a baby. The garden wasn't just a patch of weeds. It was where she had grown the food that fed us. The house wasn't just a shelter. It was a monument to her resilience. I spent the rest of the afternoon on the porch, watching the sun set over the fields I was slowly taming. The colors were brilliant, painting the sky in strokes of fire and gold. Henry, my neighbor, drove by on his tractor and gave me a long, slow wave. I waved back. I wasn't a stranger here anymore. I was part of the landscape. I thought about the word inheritance. Before, it had meant money, property, a transaction. But now I understood. My inheritance wasn't the 120 acres. It wasn't the house or the barn. It wasn't even the victory over the developers. My real inheritance was the story. It was the truth of her love. And it was the chance to build a life on the foundation of her sacrifice. A home is not something you are given. It's something you build. Sometimes you have to rebuild it from the ruins of the past. Sometimes you have to fight for it. But the fight, the work, the struggle, that's what makes it yours. The seasons turned. Summer's oppressive heat gave way to the crisp, cool air of autumn. The leaves on the oak trees that lined the driveway turned from green to a brilliant tapestry of red and gold. I had been on the farm for 6 months. The changes were slow, but they were real. The porch no longer sagged. The yard was mown. I had managed to get the old vegetable garden cleared, and had even harvested a small, lopsided crop of tomatoes and zucchini. It wasn't much, but it was mine. I had grown it from the earth she had left me. I had painted the front door, a deep, welcoming blue. It was a small thing, but every time I walked up to it, I felt a sense of pride. This was my home, and I was caring for it. I had started to meet more people in town. When I went to the grocery store, the owner, a woman named Sarah, would ask me how the barn roof was holding up. When I got gas, the attendant would give me tips on how to get the old truck through the winter. I was no longer Eleanor's boy. I was Leo. I was becoming part of the fabric of the place. One crisp October evening, I was sitting on the porch swing, the same one from the photograph, a mug of hot coffee warming my hands. The house was quiet behind me, no longer a strange and silent museum, but a comfortable, familiar space, my space. The ghosts of the past were still there, but they were no longer haunting me. They were memories, companions. I thought about the boy who had stepped off that bus 6 months ago, a boy filled with anger and fear, a boy with $74 and a plan to disappear. He seemed like a different person, someone from another life. The journey I had taken wasn't measured in miles, but in the slow, painful, and beautiful process of uncovering the truth. My grandmother had given me more than a farm. She had given me back my own history. She had given me a new story to tell myself. The world had taught me that I was disposable, a piece of paperwork to be filed away. She had taught me that I was worth fighting for. And in learning to fight for her legacy, I had learned to fight for myself. This place, this land, this story, it had saved me. It had taken a lost boy and given him a home, not just of wood and nails, but of purpose and belonging. My story isn't over. It's really just beginning. There are still leaks in the barn roof. The fields still need years of work. I have a lifetime of learning ahead of me. But every morning, I get to wake up in a place that was saved for me by a love so strong it crossed the boundaries of death. I get to be the caretaker of that love. And maybe that's the real lesson here. Home isn't just a place you live. It's the story you belong to. Sometimes we have to rewrite the stories we've been told about ourselves. We have to look past the pain, past the abandonment, and search for the more complicated, more difficult truth. Because usually, hiding in that truth is love. It might not be the simple, easy love we wish for, but a fierce, complicated, and powerful love that saves us in ways we never expected. If my story has meant something to you, if you've ever had to fight for your home, or for the truth of your own past, I want you to know you're not alone. I read every single one, and I believe our stories are how we build a community. So please, a community built on the idea that our deepest scars can become our greatest strengths, and that everyone deserves a place to call home. Thank you for listening. I turned back to look out over the fields, the last light of the day fading behind the hills. A sense of peace settled over me, as solid and real as the new board under my feet on the porch. I was home.